Thank you very much. And there is so much to cover because so much has happened. So let's just dive right in. Now, first off, if you folks haven't heard of me, I've been a practicing futurist for going on 20 years now. I have a podcast called The Next Billion Seconds. That'll pop up a little bit. I'll be referring to some stuff that we've recently covered on the podcast, but please feel free to have a listen to that. We talk about the future. Right now, we're going to talk about the sort of very near future. So let's start with 3 months ago today. 3 months ago today, I did the first of these online CFO series to Melbourne. Things in Melbourne were very nice. They were very normal. Everyone was working just wonderfully. But I brought this chart up and I said this chart, which is the effective reproduction rate of the virus, this chart was the single most important chart in all of our lives this year. And that if that rate starts to climb, what happens is our ability to plan from day to day, that ability, the forward planning horizon, becomes shorter and shorter and shorter as the effective reproduction rate rises. What we didn't know then is that it was going to climb in Victoria, and effectively what would happen is that Victoria would smash into a brick wall. Their ability to plan from day to day completely collapsed. And of course, right now, because that reproduction rate has started to drop, they can actually see into the future. Yes, they're going to be locked down for a little while longer. No one is happy about that, but they're actually getting a view into a forward planning horizon. Now, what I want to do in this talk today is actually take a look at the journey of the three East Coast states, because each of the three coast states through the pandemic have had very different experiences, and every one of those experiences are important for all of us to be able to navigate the post-COVID world. Now, one of the big things that is really clear about how strange the world we're living in now, and I'm a bit of an AFL fan, was this announcement made last week, and you guys are probably all really happy because the AFL Grand Final will be played at the Gabba outside of Victoria for the first time in history, because in Queensland you can plan for things like this. You can have 30,000 people in the Gabba, things that we can't even think about doing in New South Wales or in Victoria. So that shows you the difference of the journey between the states, and it shows you the difference in what each of the states have learned. Now, it has not been a smooth ride all the way around. We all remember, this is back in, of course, March, April, the New South Wales Department of Health cleared an entire cruise ship full of people to depart the ship. There were many infected people on that ship. That caused a massive infection wave, specifically in New South Wales, and that was a disaster at the time. There was one silver lining in that disaster, which is that it forced New South Wales to develop a very thorough tracing and testing program. They had to do that in order to follow up on all of the infections that they allowed in because of the Ruby Princess. And now, as we're seeing, New South Wales tracking and testing program is considered the gold standard in Australia. But it's only the gold standard because New South Wales made a huge mistake and had to recover from that mistake. All right, so let's start to take a look at the different journeys of the different states as we see them now. All right, Victoria. Victoria is absolutely in lockdown right now. You think you don't learn a lot in lockdown? Nah, that's not true at all. In fact, what we've learned in lockdown, and all the states learned it during the first phase of the pandemic, Victoria is getting an extended lesson in this, is actually how to hibernate businesses and an economy successfully. And you think, well, that's going to be good during the peak of the pandemic, but of course, eventually we're going to have a vaccine, and that's not going to be knowledge that we're going to need after we have the vaccine. Well, yesterday's news about the AstraZeneca vaccine causing some problems in a person has shown us that the vaccine may not be as close as we want it to be, that there could be further lockdowns. But there's actually a much bigger story than this, because in fact, the story of the 2020s, and I'm speaking as a futurist here, is going to be the story of continued service interruptions. Now, hopefully none of them will look as comprehensive and as global as the pandemic has, but that doesn't mean there aren't going to be service interruptions. Although we've mostly pushed it out of mind, we were experiencing severe interruptions in service throughout the east coast of Australia in November, December, and January because of the black summer of bushfires. We were actually getting used to the fact that there were days in Sydney where you couldn't go outside and breathe the air. And all of this was due to something that we've covered in the podcast episode that I dropped this morning. It's called the Indian Ocean Dipole, which is a pool of cool water that sits over the coast of northwestern Australia. It's relatively cool. It's still tropical. It prevents moisture from evaporating, which then means that it stops raining in southeastern Australia. So it got drier and drier, and the bushfire conditions became more and more likely. And what we know, I talked to some paleoclimatologists for this episode of my podcast. What we know is that the Indian Ocean Dipole looks like it's becoming 3 times more common than it was in the last century. So those same conditions will become more common. We will see more drought. We will see more bushfire. We will see more service interruption. And that means what they're learning in Victoria, which is how to bring things to a successful stop and then resume again. That is important knowledge for the entire country. Because we're going to get days like this. All right, New South Wales has had a very different story. We had this massive outbreak at the Crossroads Bistro. Again, New South Wales did tracking and tracing and has managed to contain a continuing series of outbreaks. We've just gotten used to this. Having outbreaks in Sydney, whether it's at a restaurant down the street, and I can tell you I live in Chippendale, there have been outbreaks in every direction around me, whether it's a health club, whatever it is, we've just gotten used to the fact that there are outbreaks. We've gotten used to the fact that if we've been through something, maybe we're going to have to go and get a test. This is the new normal for us, is actually living in a high region of uncertainty. And we're adapting to this. You know, you see more and more people now out in public places wearing masks, although we don't have to. We're strongly advised to do it on public transport or when we go to the supermarket. And so you can see people adapting to the new normal of this background level of the pandemic. So New South Wales is actually learning how to cope with a much higher degree of uncertainty day to day than it really had to before the pandemic. And so that's a lesson that again will be valuable to all of the states going forward, particularly until there's a vaccine, which again is going to be probably another 12 months away. But of course, the other side of the coin is that the CBDs across the country, and particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, have become wastelands. So this is a photo I took at Martin Place at lunchtime. This is in May, so this is sort of during the lockdown. I was going out for a medical appointment, so I had a legitimate reason. But I can tell you that Sydney CBD, while it's busier now, is not incredibly busy. It's certainly not back to where it used to be, because why? Everyone is working from home. Certainly in Sydney, if you can work from home, you're being told to work from home. There has now been an enormous amount of research work on what it means for employees and for managers when the staff starts working from home. And the first thing is that we've learned that employees actually look to the office to provide a lot of the discipline that they use to self-regulate how they work, how hard they work, and when they work. And so it is very important for managers to continuously be checking in with their employees to make sure that they are regulating well in an environment where a lot of the cues and a lot of the form and a lot of the structure that they use to regulate their work hours has simply gone away. Now, the other side of this is that a lot of the costs of maintaining the office are actually being pushed onto the employee. And so some of that means that there's probably going to have to be a renegotiation in the pay packet around the fact that, in fact, the employee is bearing some more costs for the work. And in addition, the manager really needs to take very careful care of the hours employees are working. Now, some people will be quite comfortable shifting their hours along because they have the discipline and structure. But what we have to avoid is work from home becoming work from anywhere, becoming work all the time. Because if that happens, then what happens is managers will see their staff burning out one by one as they just never stop working. So this calls for a very strong connected management, different than we had in the office because it's not in the office. And there's a lot of uncertainty around work right now. People are getting laid off. The layoffs are probably only just beginning. We're about to drop off the cliff with JobKeeper and JobSeeker. So a lot of financial assistance will be withdrawn from the economy, and it's very important for managers to consistently provide the highest degree of certainty for their employees because they are operating in a highly uncertain environment, just as we are in New South Wales. So the fortitude and the resilience that we're learning around dealing with uncertainty here is in fact something that will be needed nationally as we head into an uncertain economy. All right, Queensland. My God, you guys are just doing great. You know, the Lions are doing great. You're going to host the grand final. This is an amazing thing. You're going to have 30,000 people in the GABA for the grand final, something we couldn't even contemplate. All right. So you're actually functioning in the open economy. So what you're learning is how we actually open and stay open and reopen. Well, we know some things in that reopened world are going to be completely different. So next week, I'll drop an episode of my podcast featuring Ron Barch. Ron was the former director of safety at Qantas and is now a director at Regional Express Airlines. He knows everything about air travel. And he sat down and he said, look at Mark, air travel is never going back to what it used to be. One of the big reasons it's not going back to where it used to be is because the airlines themselves are going to be on a fundamentally different financial footing. You can't just stop an airline and start it up again. It doesn't work that way. There are going to be huge costs involved in getting them restarted, and the airlines will be very different as a result of that. But there's a more practical reason too, which is that work practices during the pandemic have fundamentally changed. More and more work that thought had to be conducted face-to-face is now being conducted online, whether it's on Teams or on Zoom or GoToWebinar, whatever it might be. We are becoming more comfortable with these tools. Businesses in a constrained economic environment will be looking to cut all of the costs they can. They will cut travel costs, and they'll be doing more of this work online. So one of the biggest revenue sources for the airlines is never going to return, or will only very slowly return to where it was. And that means we get airports that are looking like this. And that's a bad thing, because we actually do need a thriving tourism industry. Queensland needs a thriving tourism industry. It's a huge bedrock of the economy. So we now need to start to think about, what does it mean? How do we restart tourism in this environment? And how do we do that in a world where it's now predicted of the 300 international carriers in the world, only 150 of them will emerge from the pandemic. And those 150 will probably end up being repurchased by national governments as flag carriers. So in some sense, we're going back to the world of the 1970s and the 1980s before deregulation. Now, at the same time that the commercial passenger airlines have been imploding, package delivery has been exploding. Australia Post has seen a 100% increase in packages, in part because people can't go to the shops, but in part because people now find that actually buying things online is a safe and effective way of being able to do business. So Australia Post is doing more business than they ever have before at exactly the time the commercial airlines are not. And this is a very interesting inflection point and an opportunity that we're going to see. We will likely now start to see tie-ups between commercial airlines and cargo carriers, and we will see a new generation of jet aircraft that are designed to be reconfigured on per-use basis for a different ratio of cargo to passengers so that they can optimize the revenue from each flight. And that means we're actually going to start to see some very weird tie-ups. It wouldn't be surprising if Amazon, which is a huge parcel delivery service, ties up with, say, an airline like United. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if maybe the Australian government organizes a marriage between Australia Post and Qantas. They wouldn't even have to change the livery. It would all look exactly the same. This is the kind of world that we're heading into. And it means that tourism is going to be local tourism. Now, I saw something on the news yesterday that indicated, in fact, bookings for local visitors in Queensland, so people arriving intrastate, are actually up to 80 or 90% of their pre-COVID values. So that means that's already happening. We need to figure out how to lean into that. We need to figure out how to do that on an interstate basis, because it's going to be a while before international travel returns, and it will probably be a long time until it's cheap. Okay. Where we're going next. The pandemic caused an actual step change, a 0 to 1 change in the amount of digital payments that are happening in Australia. Australians love digital payments. We love our EFTPOS. We love our tap and go. But now it's pretty much the way that everyone pays for everything all of the time. I saw someone paying for something in cash the other day, and I was like, it took me a minute, because I was like, you really don't see that much anymore. What does that mean? It means that the pandemic has probably sped the transition into digital banking, digital payments in sort of the last 6 months, we've probably gone ahead almost a decade in that. So we now have not just a very advanced payments infrastructure as we do, but both with PayID and all of the other stuff that's happening with the Reserve Bank, but we now have both consumers and businesses that are increasingly savvy because they were forced to be savvy. So this is something that the entire nation has learned. And it means that increasingly we're starting to see a cashless culture. Now, I was in Perth, I think 4 years ago for a conference, and I remember being in Perth CBD and no one wanted my money. They only wanted me to tap, and I felt like I was living in the future. Well, that future has become the present for all of Australia now. So that's one thing that we're going to see. So your businesses now need to be not just compliant with digital payments, but they actually need to be leaning into them, because that represents the future for all Australian businesses, and particularly all Australian consumer-facing businesses. Now, there's something else that's come along during the pandemic that just snuck up on us. I knew it would be happening. I didn't think it would be happening quite so soon. And it's called distributed finance or decentralized finance. Decentralized finance is basically the next generation of tools that use digital currencies. So this is the cryptocurrencies, not currencies like Bitcoin, which is a first generation cryptocurrency, but a second generation cryptocurrency known as Ethereum. Now, the difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum is pretty big. Bitcoin is basically used as a store of value. It's an entry in a ledger that's provable. You can prove that you own it. You can prove that you can transfer it. It's secure. It's all of those things. Ethereum is all of those, but it's got one additional characteristic. It can also contain computer code. All right, so you can think of it as money that has a little computer inside of it, and that computer is executing a program. That program is called a smart contract. You can do something very simple, such as an escrow, where if condition A is met, then move this money from this account to that account. That's a very simple example of a smart contract. But we've had enough experience with smart contracts now that some very clever people have started to put together different things, and now they're starting to create asset pools using these. So people can take their currency and they can contribute it to an asset pool. And because of the nature of the currency, that asset pool will record the donation, and then it will be part of the same smart contract. Now, what are these asset pools being used for? They're being used to provide loans. And right now, these asset pools, because of the rules of their smart contract, will provide loans to people who put up double the collateral of their loan. So you put up 2x and you'll get 1x out of the loan pool. That means the loans are over collateralized. The loans then are very safe. Now, these asset pools have grown enormously. This is the big thing that's happened during the pandemic. They've grown from being just sort of a few $1 million to now, across all of the asset pools for all of these decentralized finance applications, it's probably closer to $100 billion that is sitting in these pools. These pools are now actively generating interest. They're generating interest at a higher rate than you can with most other competing forms of investment. And so you have a couple different ways of investing in these pools. You have a couple of different ways of operating as a borrower from these pools, but they're proving to be popular, and we're seeing a bit of a penny drop happen around this. And so the number of people who are using these decentralized finance applications is growing exponentially. And they popped up on my radar about 2 months ago. And even in that last 2-month period, the number of people who are using and investing in decentralized finance pools is growing, probably doubled in that period of time. They're not quite mature enough yet, but I can tell you that within about 5 years, they will be mature enough that people will be offering this to you as a business service, so that you will be able to have a business line of credit. You will be able to park funds in these as investment. All of that will be available to businesses. It will all be regulated. It will all be, under the normal finance rules. That was all taken care of a few years ago. So there's not going to be anything shady about this. But it represents a model that effectively disintermediates a business bank as we've known it. There'll still be business banks. We'll be using them for different sorts of things. But this kind of pooling of credit will probably be done more efficiently and less expensively through decentralized finance. All right. So we have been learning a lot in the last 6 months. From Melbourne, we have been learning how to deal with service interruptions in our economy. And we're going to need that going forward, because the 2020s are going to be a decade of interruptions. In New South Wales, we've been learning how to live with uncertainty and how to move forward in an environment where things may change quickly. And in Queensland, we have been learning that reopening means we're entering a world that doesn't look exactly like the world before. In each of these states, we're doing things we've never done before, and because of that, we're making mistakes we've never made before. But it's possible for us to learn from those mistakes, and it's possible for the states, one to another, to learn from their mistakes and to move forward together, learning everything that we've learned in Victoria, in New South Wales, and Queensland to make our way into a post-COVID world. Thank you.